Hi class, in this video we will take a look at a new control structure, the if-else-if control structure. If-else-if control structure is used when you perform multiple if tests, not a single if test. And we will take a look at the logic of this control structure using a diagram, and then later on we will write a program to actually work through this. So as you're coming down the program, what happens is that you encounter a test, and that's like a regular test that you often take in a regular if structure. The test consists of comparison, comparing a value against another value. In the middle, there would be a relational operator like less than, greater than, less than, equal to, greater than, equal to, equal, or not equal. So it's a regular comparison test. And we already know that a test will only result in true or false. So right side is the true. And if the result is true, we execute some code. And if the test is false, we don't execute any code. The square bracket represents a code being executed because the result is true. And we already know that if the result can be true or false. If the result is true, we can execute a code. If the result is false, we may not execute any code. After the code is executed, what happens is that if the result is true, we execute a code. And if we execute a code, we actually quit the if-else-if structure and we move beyond the if-else-if structure. If the test is false, in that case, what happens is we move to the next test. So if the test is true, we execute some code, and if the test is false, in that case, we execute the next set of if test or the next if test. So the second diamond that you see is the second if test that we are executing because the first test failed. And if the second test is true, just like the last time, we execute some code. So the square bracket represents the code being executed as a result of the second test. These codes are separate codes, and when you are done executing the second set of code, we move beyond the if-else structure. So if the test is true, we execute some code. If the test is false, we move on to the next if test or the next test, which is just like an if test. So the concept is quite clear that we perform multiple tests, and these tests are mutually exclusive. If the test is true, we execute some code. If the test is false, we move on to the next test. And if that test is true, then it will execute some code and quit. And if that test is false, it will move on to the next test. So it's kind of a structure where you have multiple tests, but the tests are mutually exclusive. And if the test is true, we execute some code. If the test is false, we actually move on to the next test. You are actually allowed one single else. So the last square you just saw is a single else. And so after the three tests, in this case we only had three tests. If all the tests fail, then the last is the else. The last code you see is the else. And once the else executes, you basically move beyond the if-else-if structure. So to go over the if-else-if structure one more time, an if-else-if structure is made up of multiple if tests, not a single if test. The concept is that you perform a test. If the test is true, then you execute some code and you quit the if-else-if structure. If the test fails, you move on to the next test. You perform that test. If that test fails, you move on to the next one. If the second test is true, you execute a different code for the second test, just like an if test. And just like that, you can design as many if tests as you want. The very last one is else. You're allowed to use a single else that will only execute if all the previous if tests fail. So These tests are mutually exclusive. Only one of them would be true at any time. And what happens is that we use this in those situations where a single variable is compared against multiple criterion, many different criterion. So each test uses the same variable on the left side and the same relational operator in the middle, but on the right side, the criterion happens to be a different criterion. For the each test, the criterion would be different. However, the value you're comparing against the criterion will be the same, and even the relational operator will be the same. To recap, an if-else-if structure uses multiple if tests. These tests are mutually exclusive, meaning only one of the tests can be true, not more than one. The value that we compare remains the same in all the tests, but the criterion, meaning whatever we are comparing against, is different in each of the tests. The relational operator we use also remains the same in all the tests. If you're using less than or greater than equal to, less than equal to, that also remains the same. The critical aspect we have is that as soon as one of the tests is true, then the code for that test is executed, and after that, the control of the program moves beyond the if-else-if structure, meaning if one test is true, then no other tests will be performed, and the else will also be ignored. So the critical point to keep in mind is that if one of the tests is true, first or second or third or fourth or fifth, whatever test you got, if any of the tests is true, and remember, only one test can be true. They are mutually exclusive. So if any of the tests is true, the control, after the code for the test is executed, the control of the program will move beyond the if-else-if structures, meaning all the tests that follow the test that was true will be ignored. So we will take a look at a program that uses the if-else-if control structure. We'll write a couple of programs, actually more than a couple. And this is a very useful structure because this is very commonly used in C++ programming and programming of pretty much all of the languages. So this was a theoretical introduction to the if-else-if structure.